All right, I will say good morning. Good morning. Let us begin. Begin by thanking all of our sponsors for this morning's shir. To thank our Talmud Torah sponsor for Tafshin Pei, our annual Talmud Torah sponsor, the Tilson Mishpacha of Eretz Yisrael, for dedicating all the shir and drashos this year as a zechus for Besaros Tovos for all of Am Yisrael. Our Talmud Torah sponsors for the month of Teves Haba Aleinu L'Tova, the Kelman Mishpacha, for dedicating the shir this month in memory of Amit ben David Levi, the brother of Itai Levi, who was killed fighting in Gaza on the first night of Hanukkah. We hope that his neshama, together with the neshama of all of our precious soldiers who have been Moser Nefesh, HaKadushas Hashem Ha'am Ba'aretz, will have a tremendous aliyah, and Emirat Hashem, their families, a nechama. We dedicate our learning in the schos of the return of our hostages. May HaKadosh Baruch Hu, Emirat Hashem, bring them back to their mishpachos b'shalom and b'karov, and the merit of our holy soldiers, may Hashem protect them and allow them to be successful b'chol ma'aseh yedehem. But with that, let us begin. We have a lot to do today. Today's daf is Chav Test 29. We are picking up on Chav Ches Amud Beis 28b, and we are picking up Emirat Hashem. Let's just pick up 2 lines from before the lines get wide. Yes, that far up. So, but again, Baruch Hashem, we will make it. So the Gemara says, so I actually started this case yesterday. Amar Rav bar Chana, Meid Adam Ishta Arusa. A person is permitted to give testimony for his wife who is an Arusa. Right? So in other words, he's only, Reuven's marrying Rachel, but they only did Erusin. They haven't done Nisuin. So they've engaged in the initial part of marriage, but they're not yet living together as husband and wife. So the halacha is that Rabbi bar Chana says that Reuven is permitted to go in and give testimony on behalf for or against, it sounds like for or against, his wife. Amar Ravina, mostly first white line, Lo Amar Ela Lafukimine. That's only true in order to extract money from her. In other words, because he has no conflict of interest there. But again, to testify on her behalf that she should acquire money, that is not believed. Why? Because there he's conflicted. Why is he conflicted? Because halacha l'maisa, whatever she gains, ultimately again, he will gain. So the Gemara says, Velohi, it's not true. Lo shna lavu, give lo shna le'eluye, lo mehemen. It's not true. The truth is, again, the Gemara now disagrees, and the Gemara says, in reality, an arus, a husband, even if it's only irisin, is not believed to testify on behalf of his wife, regardless. Right? Whether it's to that she could acquire money, lose money, it doesn't make a difference. He's not believed. He's not believed. He's considered to be a karav, considered to be a relative, and therefore halacha l'maisa, not believed. My daitech. So the Gemara says, well, let's analyze this. What is it that you were thinking? So the Gemara says, Kidam Rabbi bar Ami mishvei du'ula ishto arusa. So we'll say just a separate halacha. Here's what originally shaped our thinking. Third wide line, 28b, Chav Ches Amud Beis. So Ishta Arusa, so this is about a Kohen. Or just Stam, actually, well, it's both a Kohen and not Kohen. Reuven is married to Rachel. They only did Erusin. So let's remember again, how do you affect Erusin? Reuven gave Rachel an item of value. He said, Hari'at mikudeshes li betabaz. Zu become mikudesh with this ring. Erusin, they're married, but cannot live together. So Ishta Arusa, Lo onein v'lo metamela. So if a man has erusin with a woman, and let's say again she dies, so he does not become an onein for her. Remember again, aninus is the status between death and burial, where the mourner is exempt from all positive mitzvos. So now the Gemara says that does not apply to erusin. Furthermore, if Reuven's a Kohen, he would not go to her funeral. He cannot become tummy for her. So I'll say, what does that show you? That as much as they're married, she is not really halachically, in certain respects, considered to be his wife. Similarly, again, she does not become an onin for him if he were to die, nor does she become tamei. And I will say now, again, what does this mean? So Rashi points out, it's just really making it symmetrical. Remember, there is no din of tumah by a kohenes, right? The daughter of a kohen, a bas kohen, is permitted to become tamei. But it's just making it symmetrical. Meisa eina yarsha. If she dies, he does not inherit her. Meisu, if he dies, govek ksuvasa. She will collect her ksuva. And Rashi points out there, what does that mean? There's no ksuva until after nisuin. So Rashi points out what that means is, if he promised her, he could remember. Reuven could commit to a ksuva during erusin if he wants to, and if he indeed committed to a ksuva, then haloch l'meisa, she would collect that ksuva. So I will say, but what do you see from here? What you see from here is that during erusin, in certain respects, halachically, they're not considered married. That's what gave the Havamina to say that a man could testify regarding his arusa wife. To which the Gemara says, apples and oranges. Hasam b'she'ero talarachmana, akati lo she'ero. We will say with those halachas, in order for a wife to be a wife, she has to be considered she'ero. She'ero means like his flesh, meaning they're living together. And that's why, again, if they're not living together, the full marital bond has not been created, and therefore, again, these halachos don't apply. When it comes to testimony, what are we concerned about? We're concerned about a conflict of interest. When do you have a conflict of interest? When you're close to someone. Even after erusin, we would assume that they are already close. The Gemara says, because they're close, therefore again, he should not be able to testify. And I both say that is how we paskin. We paskin that a man cannot testify on behalf of his arusa wife, right? Whether it's to go ahead and benefit her, right, that she should acquire money, or to lose money, he is considered to be a relative to her, therefore he is conflicted, and therefore halacha l'maisa can't testify. Good, let's go back there. Chargo levado, supposed to remember again in the Mishnah. So the Mishnah mentioned a chargo is a stepson, right? So again, a stepson is considered to be a relative, and therefore again, you can't testify in anything regarding him. But interestingly enough, as much as with the other relatives, that status was also passed on to other descendants of that relative. When it comes to a stepson, you're only not allowed to testify on behalf of the stepson, but that's it. No other extended relatives. So Gemara says, let's analyze this. Chargo levado. So only a stepson. Only a stepson. Rabbi Yossi says giso. Rabbi Yossi says this actually, the halacha is not by a stepson, it's by a brother-in-law. Right? You're not allowed to testify on behalf of, against your brother-in-law, but again, it only applies to your brother-in-law himself, not to any of the descendants or offshoots of the brother-in-law. So Vatanya Idach, another brayse says giso levado. Rabbi Huda Omer chargo. Brayse says, again, the Tanakama says only a brother-in-law this applies to. Rabbi Yehuda says no, it applies to a stepson. My kamar, what's going on over here? So if we're saying like this, that Allah you can't testify for or against the stepson. But again, I just want to point out, we saw this in yesterday's daf, that a lot of times when you can't testify on behalf of relatives, you remember again, we saw yesterday in the daf, it was like uncle, remember again who it was? Uncle, his son-in-law, right? What we call third-degree relatives, even. So now, what the Gemara is suggesting over here is perhaps what the Bryce is saying is as follows: when it comes to your stepson, you're only not allowed to engage in testimonial matters regarding the stepson himself. But the stepson status does not extend to any additional layers of relatives. And the same halacha applies to a brother-in-law. Only a brother-in-law, no one else. And Rabbi Yossi comes along and says that no, it applies to the brother-in-law, right, and also to the stepson. What do you do with the Mishnah? Because the Mishnah says you can't testify on behalf of your brother-in-law, right, or involving your brother-in-law, and that applies to your brother-in-law, who? His son and his son-in-law. So whose opinion is that? Lo Rabbi Yehuda, Rabbi Yossi. It'll either be Rabbi Yehuda and Rabbi Yossi. Ve'ela hachikam. That's what it means to say. Chargo levado. The truth is, the halacha is like this: you can't get involved in testimonial activity regarding your stepson, but that only applies to your stepson. No other derivative relatives from your stepson. Aval giso, when it comes to your brother-in-law, hu ubno v'chasno. Right, when it comes to your brother-in-law, again, you can't testify on behalf of your brother-in-law, and also, again, your brother-in-law, his son, your brother-in-law's son, and your brother-in-law's son-in-law. All those individuals are also part of the testimonial prohibition. Plus, Rabbi Yossi comes along and says, Giso levado. No, it's your brother-in-law, and only your brother-in-law. Aval chargo, when it comes to your stepson, so then again, the testimonial prohibition will apply to who? Ubno v'chasno. Then it'll apply ultimately again to the stepson, the stepson's son, and his son-in-law. We saw this in yesterday's daf. The cases of the 8 fathers that turns out to be 24 relatives. Whose opinion does that reflect? That was yesterday's daf. Lo Rabbi Yossi, lo Rabbi Yehuda. It reflects neither of those opinions. What it means to say. One more time. Chargo levado. The truth is, when it comes to stepson, the prohibition on stepson applies to the stepson himself. No other derivative relatives from the stepson. Aval giso, when it comes to your brother-in-law, hu ubeno v'chasno. It applies to your brother-in-law, right? Your brother-in-law himself, his son, and his son-in-law. Ba'asi Rabbi Yossi Lameim. Rabbi Yossi comes along and says, Giso levado, v'kol shekin chargo. And Rabbi Yossi essentially does this. Rabbi Yossi agrees when it comes to stepson, but he says that a brother-in-law is treated like a stepson, and therefore Allah Chalamayis, again, both of them are prohibited, but again for testimony, but none of the derivative relatives from them are included in this prohibition. And ultimately, again, the Mishnah reflects the view of Rabbi Huda, and the Brisa reflects the view of Rabbi Yossi. Okay, says the Gemara, Am Rabbi Huda Amar Shmuel, halacha Rabbi Yossi. The halacha follows Rabbi Yossi, namely that's what? That again, in testimonial matters, so again, there can't be any testimony regarding, I can't give any testimony regarding my stepson, and again, I can't be involved in testimony, but that prohibition only applies to my stepson himself, doesn't apply to any of the stepson's derivative relatives. Furthermore, same thing, same halacha applies to brother-in-law. I can't go ahead and engage in testimony regarding my brother-in-law, but Allah Chalamayis, again, that prohibition is only upon him, doesn't apply to any of the other derivative relatives. Okay, beautiful. Says the Gemara, Hahu masnasa dahavichasim ale gisi. We'll say, okay, so there's an interesting story over here. There was a matana, there was a gift, right? Now this gift, let's just call it Reuven was giving Shimon a gift, and it had a shtar, and on the shtar was signed, two brothers-in-law. So the witnesses were brothers-in-law themselves, right? Witness A, witness B were brothers-in-law with each other. So the Gemara says as follows. So Rav Yosef lachshura. So Rav Yosef wanted to say it should work. So you have two brothers-in-law serving as witnesses together on this gift. So Rav Yosef wanted to say that it should be kosher. Why? Tam Rav Yehuda Amar Shmuel halacha k'Rabbi Yossi. The halacha follows Rabbi Yossi. So the Gemara says, good. Amar le Abaye. Abaye said, Mimai, Rabbi Yossi de Masnis and de Machshir. How do you know it's Rabbi Yossi of our Mishnah? Stephen, you can move. I moved that table back last night because of shear. I'm sorry, I forgot to move it back. So the Gemara says as follows. So the Gemara says, so how do you know that it's Rabbi Yossi of our Mishnah that ultimately holds that it's kosher? Maybe Dilma Rabbi Yossi de Braisa de Pasal Begiso. Maybe it's Rabbi Yossi. That's a gabai, by the way. Full service. If anyone needs a coffee refill, just raise your cup. Right? So the Gemara says as follows. Maybe it's Rabbi Yossi of the Braisa who ultimately again passes by the brother-in-law. How do you know which Rabbi Yossi it is? So now, because let's listen to this, because Shmuel said, like myself, Shmuel referring to himself, and Pinchas. Shmuel and Pinchas, Tavinan Achi, we are brothers and brothers-in-law. But say, how can you ever have a case of brothers who are also brothers-in-law? It's a case of two brothers who marry two sisters. So they're brothers, but they're also brothers-in-law. So again, like Shmuel said, the halacha l'maisa, if my brother, if Pinchas and I were to sign on a document together, halacha l'maisa, again, it would be kosher. So I'm sorry, it would be pasul, because we are brothers and brothers-in-law. Aval gisi ba'al da'alma shapir dami. But brothers, so again, Shmuel was saying the only reason why if Pinchas and I signed on a document together, it would be pasul is because we're brothers. But you can infer from that if it was just because we are brothers-in-law, then it should be permitted. Ana upinchas mishum digiso kamar. Maybe not. Maybe what Shmuel was saying was he wasn't even referring to the fact that Shmuel and Pinchas were brothers, but he was referring to the fact that we are brothers-in-law. Maybe that's what would invalidate everything. So the Gemara says, "Go ana upinchas mishum digiso kamar le mishum giso kamar amrle zil kanye be'edim misira." So he said, "Okay, go and acquire the gift with edim misira." So in other words, we'll say. So remember again, the issue over here. The issue over here is that you had a gift, right? Let's just go back to the case. Reuven wanted to give Shimon a gift. So they come to Beis and they present a shtar. In the shtar, it outlines the gift. Problem is, on the shtar, the witnesses are two brothers-in-law. They brought this to Rav Yosef. Rav Yosef originally wanted to go ahead and say, this should be fine because it reflects the view of Rabbi Yossi in the Braisa. And Rabbi Yossi in the Braisa says that brothers-in-law are okay to serve as witnesses. Now the Gemara is quoting other opinions like Shmuel, who seems to say that brothers-in-law are not okay. So Rabbi Yosef is trying to figure out how we could allow this gift to be effective. So then he says, I have a good idea. Let's rely on Eidei Mesira. Rabbi say back to our Gittin days. Remember again, what was Rabbi say about Eidei Mesira? Rabbi says Eidei Mesira Karsi, which means that it doesn't really matter who signed in the shtar. What matters? Who witnesses the giving over of the document. So give over the document in front of two valid witnesses, and we're good to go. To which the Gemara says, hold up. The Gemara says, Rabbi Abba Molder, Rabbi Lazar, Rabbi Mezuyef Mitocho, Shehu Pasal. But Rabbi Lazar holds, or will say, even Rabbi Lazar who holds that Eidei Mesira Karsi will say like this. If you have a document, and inside the document it appears that the document is inherently void. For example, if you have witnesses that are clearly invalid, that will invalidate the shtar. So even Rabbi Lazar, who says that Eidei Mesira Karsi, halacha l'maisa, again, if you have brothers-in-law signing in the shtar, would that not automatically invalidate it? To which the Gemara says, Amarle, Zil. So Rabbi Yosef says to the two guys, sorry, you gotta leave. Zil, lo shafki li da svinalach. I'm sorry, you gotta leave. There's no way I could affect the validity of this get. So Rabbi Yosef essentially said, okay, I'm stuck. Because you've got the brothers-in-law signing in the shtar, there's nothing really I could do to allow this shtar to be effective. Okay, beautiful. Rabbi Huda Omer. So remember again, Rabbi Huda in the Mishnah, said that halacha l'maisa, even if he gave the case of, where let's say again, Ruvain has a daughter. In this case, we'll call her Rachel. Ruvain's daughter Rachel marries Shimon. Now what happens? They have children, and then Rachel dies. So Rabbi Huda in the Mishnah said that Shimon, Ruvain's son-in-law, is still considered to be a relative of Ruvain, even though again, their mutual relative, i.e. Ruvain's daughter, Shimon's wife, died. So it appears to be that according to Rabbi Huda, it's really the presence of the children that keeps father-in-law and son-in-law connected. So the Gemara says as follows. So both say we're on Chaf Chesem base 28b, 6 lines up from the bottom. Rabbi Huda Omer, Rabbi Tanchum, Rav Tavla, Rabbi Rona, Rav. Halach Rabbi Huda, the halach follows Rabbi Huda. Suppose there's an interesting son-in-law, right? Father-in-law, son-in-law case that they remain related by dint of the grandchildren. Even though again the daughter-wife has passed away. Rava Amrav Nachman, Rabbi Huda. The halacha is not Rabbi Huda. The Chinam Rama Bar Bachana Am Rabbi Yochanan in halacha Rabbi Huda. The halacha does for Rabbi Huda. Ige de Basnila Laha Dra Bar Bachana. Some went ahead and appended the statement of Rabbi Bar Bachana to the following scenario. As Zudar Rabbi Yossi Aglili. Rabbi Yossi Aglili dash in the following halacha says fascinating. Ubasa ala kohanim v'alavim v'la shofet asher yihiyeh b'yamim ahem. You will come to the kohanim, the levim, and to the judge who will be living in your days. The Gemara asks an obvious question. So I'll say, why does the Torah have to tell me if you have a legal matter, go to the judge who's alive during your days, shkoyach, and what? If Torah wouldn't have said that, what? I would have gone to a judge who's not alive during my days. Like in other words, why does the Torah need to put in that statement? So the Gemara says, listen to this, Ella zeshahaya karov v'nisrachek. Rather, Abba what it refers to is the following, that a judge is only disqualified from you if he is related to you by a mim hahem, in that time. But a judge who was related to you, but is no longer related to you at the time of the judicial proceeding, is permitted to adjudicate. And therefore, again, the Gemara says that halacha l'maisa, this would seem to dispel the notion of Rabbi Huda, right? That again, we're arguing Rabbi Huda because Rabbi Huda says that since there are grandchildren, you're still related to your son-in-law. To which the Gemara essentially says, no, you're not. No, you're not. You're related to your son-in-law when your daughter is alive. She's the bridge. But if your daughter is not alive, then ultimately, again, a father-in-law and son-in-law no longer have a legal relationship, even though they share a relationship to grandchildren. And therefore, halacha l'maisa, they could adjudicate each other's cases. Beautiful. The halacha follows Rabbi Yossi HaGalili. Okay, beautiful. Beautiful, like we said before. So the Gemara says as follows: Bnei Chamud Mar Ukva. So it's an interesting case over here. The sons of the father-in-law of Mar Ukva. So right, which means his brothers-in-law. Right, the sons of the father-in-law of Mar. So Mar Ukva's brothers-in-law. Top of Chavtes, 29a. Look at this. Krovim v'nisrachaku. They were related, and It was unnecessary. Right? Right? They were related, and then they became distanced. Now, what does that mean? So remember again, what it means is Mar Ukva's wife passed away. So now, technically speaking, he's no longer related to his brothers-in-law. Okay, so what happens? As the Gemara says, so they came before him to adjudicate a case. Okay, so again, Mar Ukva's former brothers-in-law came to him to adjudicate a case. Now again, at the point when they came to him, they're former because Mar Ukva's wife, their sister, passed away already. So what happened? Amar lahu, paslina l'chol adina. Mar Ukva says, I'm sorry, I can't help you. Can't help you. I'm puzzled to adjudicate this case. Amrulay said Mar Ukva. My Rabbi Huda. So what are you saying? Can we pass like Rabbi Huda? Because remember again, this is Rabbi Huda in the Mishnah, right? Rabbi Huda in the Mishnah said essentially, any in-law relationship is maintained even after what we'll call it, even after the bridge relative died, as long as there are children. So in other words, you are related to your in-laws, to your in-law relatives, as long as there are children that are, so again, so Mar Ukva, so the former brothers-in-law of Mar Ukva come to Mar Ukva to adjudicate a case. Mar Ukva says, I can't do it. The brothers-in-law say, oh, you're probably thinking the halacha is like Rabbi Huda, which says that what? Even though Mar Ukva, your wife, our sister, passed away, because there are children, we're still related. But yet the brothers-in-law said, Anan, my sinan igarta me ami ma'arava. So they said, we brought a letter with us from Eretz Yisrael that says the halacha doesn't follow Rabbi Huda. Namely, the halacha is that once what we'll call the bridge relative dies, there is no longer a legal relationship. So essentially they're telling Mar Ukva, we're not related anymore. Right? Your wife, our sister, died. We're not related anymore, and therefore, again, you can adjudicate our case. Amar lahu, atu bekaba dekira ibakna b'chu. So it's great. Rabbi Huda says, no. I know we're not related. Right? In other words, what do you think? That literally translated, do you think that I am stuck to you like wax is to a surface? Like Rabbi Huda, what Rabbi Huda was saying is, I'm not, in other words, I guess it's an expression, right? So in other words, I know that we are not technically related. That's not the reason I can't adjudicate your case. I'm not saying that I can't adjudicate your case legally, but rather I'm saying I'm not going to do it. Why? You're not going to listen to my psak. So apparently there was some family history over here, right? So in other words, so again, Mar Ukva says, this has nothing to do with us being legally related. I got it. I know the halacha does not follow Rabbi Huda, and therefore again, we're not legally related now that the bridge relative died. But I also know you guys well, and I know, by the way, both I also want to point out something very interesting. They traveled from Eretz Yisrael to Bavel, which is interesting, right? They brought a letter from Eretz Yisrael to Bavel. I don't know, there are Batei Din in Eretz Yisrael, there are Rabbanim in Eretz Yisrael. So Mar Ukva was like, we both know what's going on over here, right? You want me to give you a good ruling, but if you don't like what I'm going to tell you, you're also not going to listen. So this says, therefore, I'd rather just not get involved. Incredible. There is a, it's interesting because you sometimes see like these competing narratives in the Gemara, right? We saw the story, on Sunday, with Reish Lakish, who chastised the Rabbanim for not standing up to people who were violating Shemitah. And then you see other stories where the right approach is not to get involved in certain things, right? Mar Ukva, it's fascinating. Mar Ukva is saying, I know enough to know when not to get involved with something because it's not going to end well. So this interesting dialectic between sometimes the obligation to get involved in order to stave off a negative outcome versus other times knowing the outcome is going to be negative and therefore I choose not to involve myself in order not to create any unnecessary difficulty. Very interesting. Okay, so we'll say, so now the last part of the Mishnah, this is going to get really exciting. So the last part of the Mishnah, well, it's all been exciting. The last part of the Mishnah spoke about the idea that an Ohev and a Sone were prohibited to go ahead and give Eidos, right? Ohev and a Sone, right? A person, right? So we'll call close friends and enemies. Okay, so listen to this. So the Gemara says as follows. So Ohev zeh shoshvino. So remember, the Mishnah said, what's an Ohev? Ayman Chav Tes Amud Aleph 29a, the last of the short lines on top. So what does it mean, an Ohev, a close friend? Zeh shoshvino. This is like literally a shoshvino, is like a groomsman. This is someone who goes ahead and during the chasana brings food, brings drink. So this is like a close friend. So we'll say v'kama. So how long does that status go on for? In other words, both say, so now we're saying this person is disqualified from giving eidos. So now, how long does that status extend for? In other words, is that forever, right? Somebody was your groomsman at your chasana, so that's forever for the rest of your life. They can't give eidos. Obviously, there's a window. So Amarav kol shiva simei mishta, 7 days. So in other words, if somebody was your shoshin, someone was your close friend, they were bringing food and drink during your chasana, for the duration of Sheva Brachas, they're considered Ohavo, your close friend, and they cannot engage in any testimonial activity for or against you during that period of time. So we'll say, listen to this. The Rabban in the name of Rava said, no. It's really only from the day of the wedding. On the day of the wedding, they're your good friend. Afterwards, again, they no longer have the status of Ohavav, all right, Ohev, and therefore they're permitted to give testimony. They both say, it's such a, so again, that's the halacha. Now again, we don't paskin this way. We don't paskin that these individuals are apostle eidos. I would say, but it is fascinating the way Chazal define the word Ohev. What's the definition of a best friend? Someone, who feels close to you for 7 days, right? What was the definition? Ultimately, again, according to the first opinion. Second opinion, Oiv is only the day that he brings you the food of the wedding. Because I think there's a tremendous profundity in this, which is human relationships are incredibly fickle. And at the end of the day, an Ohev. Now, Ohev is a pretty strong word, right? Ohev is a person who you love, right? Who loves you. So I'll say love changes, and sometimes love changes pretty quickly. And sometimes one of the most shocking things in human relationships is the speed and pace in which relationships could take such a dramatic turn. And I would say human nature is such that even people who we very much appreciate today, we don't appreciate tomorrow. Because people often operate with the premise of, what have you done for me lately? Right? Often we have short-term memory in terms of relationships, and relationships are often built on what have you given me or what have you done for me today. Again, and it's something we have to be so acutely aware of, because if you've ever been on the receiving end of that, someone who perhaps you've done a lot for, and then something doesn't go exactly the way that person wants, and they get all upset, it's sometimes a little bit shocking. Like, what about all of the relationship history? Like, what about all of the stuff beforehand? And it's strange, but it's important to understand that's how HaKadosh Baruch Hu built us, right? It's just, again, we have to work on it. We have to overcome that. But it's interesting, even the word Ohev. What does Ohev mean? For the day of the Chasana, your best friends. What's going to be tomorrow? Tomorrow's a new relationship day. And the relationship day, sometimes everything resets. Sometimes the expectation of longevity in relationship. I don't mean relationships like your marriage or things like that. I mean longevity just like in friendships. Sometimes it's not there. And it's important to understand, again, if you look, I would have thought, before this schema, I would have thought, what's the definition of an Ohev? Someone who Chazal are calling an Ohev? I don't know, I would have thought an Ohev, I don't know, a childhood friend. Someone who's been like your friend for 5 years. What's the definition of an Ohev? Someone who brought you food and a bottle of schnapps at your chasana, right? And how long is he your Ohev for? That day. That day. Do not expect anything the next day. Okay, maybe it'll go for Sheva Brachas. He'll say, sometimes one of the most difficult things to accept in life is that people are fickle. They don't have a lot of relationship historical perspective and are only focused on what have you done for me lately. Sometimes Rabbi say one of the most liberating things in life is do not count on people to be your long-term friends. But if you need something, and when you do that, what you end up doing is you empower yourself to get things done. Because you recognize, I really can't, there's always a small circle of people, of course, that I can rely on. But that doesn't apply to most people. It really, maybe it applies to your closest loved ones, maybe relatives, maybe a very minute circle of friends, but you can't really depend on people. If you want things in life to happen, you got to make it happen yourself. Because even the Ohev, which is a very strong term, a day, 7 days, but not really a very long time. A difficult lesson, but a very empowering lesson for personalistic life success as well. Let's go back there. I promise it's going to become more upbeat. So Gemara says as follows: Hasone kol shelo dibrai. So what's a sonne? What's an enemy? What's an enemy? An enemy is anyone who you have not spoken with for 3 days because of animosity. So Tana Rabbanon. So the Gemara says as follows: V'hu lo oyev lo yidenu. So I'll say. So remember again the pasuk. Now again the pasuk is V'hu lo oyev lo mevakesh ra'aso. So this is actually talking about someone who kills someone else accidentally. Totally nothing to do with testimony. It's talking about someone. So again, the halacha is if you kill someone accidentally, you go to galus. But again, if there was a negative relationship history over there, then again, the Torah is a little bit suspect whether or not it was actually an accident. So it says v'hu lo oyev. So the Gemara darshans, if he's not an enemy, lo yi'idenu. If someone's not your enemy, he could testify on your behalf. And again, if someone who doesn't want anything bad to happen to you, he can testify on your behalf. Ashkechan sone. So we'll say, so now I understand that an enemy, someone who is my enemy, which means, we'll say, well, now what does it mean an enemy? Someone who doesn't, the definition of an enemy is someone who wants something bad to happen to me. That's the definition of an enemy. So again, the Mishnah is giving a more defined definition. Someone who's so angry at me that they would not speak with me for 3 days. That's the definition of an enemy. So the Gemara says, ohev minalan. From where do you know that's someone who you love? All right, a close friend is not permitted for testimony as well. So kari behachi v'hula oyev lo v'lo ohev lo yi'idenu. So the same way again, so like we love a play on words. V'hula oyev, that's the pasuk, and we could. It also sounds like v'hula ohev. He's also not your best friend. V'lo mevakesh ra'aso v'lo tavaso. Someone who doesn't want bad things to happen to me, but also someone who doesn't want great things to happen to me. Yidinenu. So the Gemara says, come on. That's not what the pasuk says. The pasuk is only talking about an enemy. The pasuk is not talking about a close friend. Ella svarahu. Rather, the Gemara says it's a svara. Oyev my time mishun demerachka daite. Ohev nami demekarva daite. So both say, remember, friends and enemies are two sides of the same coin. Two sides of the same coin, right? My enemy can't testify against me. Why? Because ultimately, again, he's estranged from me, and therefore, again, also because he's estranged, he may have a negative perception. My good friend, my close friend, is someone who's very close to me. Because he's close to me, may also be skewed in what it is that he's saying. So, I'll say, isn't this fascinating that Ohev and Oyev they're two sides of the same coin, which again is another dynamic in human relationships, that the Ohavim of today could become the Oivim of tomorrow. But conversely also, the Oivim of today could also become the Ohavim of tomorrow. But once again, highlighting this dynamic of the ficklekeit of human relationships. And I will say this is incredibly important. It is important to understand how fickle human relationships are. And that's why, again, a person has to be so careful, number one, in relationships in which they invest, and how much you depend on those relationships to accomplish the things you need to in life. Because as much as it would be nice to think that the friends of today are the friends of tomorrow, it doesn't necessarily work that way. So if I'm putting all of my, so to speak, accomplishment eggs in those friendship baskets, that may be a very dangerous thing to do if you really want to accomplish in life. Incredible yisod though. So the Gemara says as follows. So the Gemara says, Rabbanon, what do the Rabbanon do with this? So the Gemara says, Chad l'dayon. So one ultimately again is to teach me the halachas regarding a judge. So we'll say, so remember again, the Rabbanon disagree with Rabbi Yehuda or with the Tanakama in the Mishnah, right? The Rabbanon don't accept this idea that of an ohev, of a sona, yes, but not of an ohev. So we'll say, so what do they do with it? But even the Rabbanon who say that even someone who's your close friend, they could testify on your behalf, the Rabbanon would agree that someone who's your close friend cannot be a dayan, can't be a judge. Can't be a judge. So the Gemara says, Goev idach ki l'sanya Rabbi Yossi Rabbi Yehuda v'hula oyev lo v'lo mevakesh ra'aso mikan l'shtei talmidei chachamim shesonin zeh she'yoshin b'din echad. So we'll say they use the other one to teach us that two talmidei chachamim who despise each other cannot sit on the same beis din. So I'll say, interestingly enough, that halacha l'maisa again, which makes sense, because if the beis din is not able to work as a cohesive unit, that undermines the integrity of the judgment they're going to deliver. Incredible, I will say. All right, so halacha l'maisa again. So first of all, you should just know, halacha l'maisa, the Rambam does not accept this idea of the ohev and the soneh. Right? So halacha l'maisa, even if someone is your close friend, they are believed to give testimony. Even if someone is your enemy, they are believed to give testimony. And I will say now, the next mission, we're going to talk about how we cross-examine witnesses. In other words, we don't just allow people to roll into beis din and give testimony, but just because someone is known to be your close friend or to be your enemy does not automatically disqualify them from from giving testimony. Now again, I will say, it will halacha l'maisa disqualify them from being a judge, right? So in other words, your close friend or your enemy cannot be a judge on your Beis Din, but they can be a witness. They can be a witness. Okay, so let's go right there. But this is really interesting. Now we're getting into the mechanics. Ketzad, both Kim Edim. So now we've spent a good amount of time focusing on who is fit to be a witness and who is not. Then we get into the process of how do we go ahead and cross-examine or just examine the witnesses. So the first thing we do is we bring them into a room and we intimidate them. Okay, how we intimidate them, we shall see. And what do we do? We take everybody out of the room. Get everybody out of the room, and we leave the more senior or greater of the two witnesses, and we leave them alone in a room. It's like a witness interrogation room. And we say to him, tell me, right? We'll call him, right? Tell me, witness number one, how do you know? Let's say, for example, the case in front of Beis Din was that Ruvain owed Shimon $1,000, right? That's the claim. Ruvain says he doesn't, Shimon says he does, and now witnesses are there to support Shimon that Ruvain owes him $1,000. So we isolate the greater of the two witnesses. I guess the Pashtas Gadol would just mean either the older one or the one who's greater in stature. We go ahead and we isolate him by himself. And we say to him, tell us, how do you know that Ruvain owes Shimon $1,000? Im Amar hu Amar li Shani Chayev lo, Ish Ploni Amar li Shu Chayev lo Amar Klum. So if witness number one says, I'll tell you how, Ruvain told me that he owes Shimon $1,000, right? Or Levi told me that Ruvain owes Shimon $1,000, so such a testimony is no longer valid. So we'll see why this is. Interestingly enough, I don't know. One would have thought that hearing Ruvain say that he owes Shimon $1,000, that's it, right? That's in the bag. We're going to see that halacha l'maaseh from a testimonial perspective, that is a meaningless statement. So we'll see why that is. So what is proper testimony? If witness number one says, we were present when Ruvain, the borrower, admitted in the presence of Shimon, the lender, that he owes Shimon $1,000. If that happened, that's good testimony. So then after, again, we interrogate witness number one. We then bring in witness number two. Both can also, we investigate him. So if it turns out that their testimonies line up, then again, I both say, now understand, all that does, what are we trying to figure out over here? We're trying to figure out admissibility of testimony. Once we've done this process and now we've established that testimony is admissible, now we begin the case. Right now, I begin the case. But in other words, so it's interesting that in other words, investigation of testimony is almost like a pre-trial process. First of all, let's get after the witnesses check out, let's begin the din Torah. Shnaim omrim zakai ve'echad omer chayiv zakai. So I will say now we switch back to the Beis Din. So now let's say the Beis Din is sitting, and the Beis Din, there are three judges. Two say innocent and one says guilty. Zakai. We go off to the majority. Shnaim omrim chayiv ve'echad omer zakai. Two say guilty and one says innocent. Chayiv. Okay, we follow the majority. Echad omer chayiv ve'echad omer zakai. What if one says guilty, one says innocent? Afilu shnaim zakai and shnaim chayiv. Or two say innocent, two say guilty. Ve'echad omer eini yodea. We saw this already in the beginning of the Sechta. One judge says, I don't know. See, he doesn't offer an opinion. What's the halakha? And I will say, we've seen this already before. When a judge says, I don't know, so what happens? It's as if he does not exist. It's as if he does not exist. He is removed from the panel. Now, the process that we do with that, interestingly enough, is Yosifu Dayanim. What we do is we're going to see is we add on additional judges in increments of two. We'll discuss this process in the Gemara. But the takeaway over here, we'll say, is that halacha l'maisa, if a judge says, I don't know, I think, right, in the legal system, like, you could have a judge, if you have a panel, you could have somebody who says undecided. Is there such kinds like that? You don't have in the Supreme Court. Can you say undecided? No, you have to take a role, you have to take a position. I'm sorry? Recuse, right, but that'd be the same, right? So in any event, in halacha at least, when you go out and you say you don't know, you're out. So when it says Gamru Sadavar, so if Beis Din passed the verdict, listen to this. So let's see what happens. So now you can see, by the way, the process, right? So step one is investigation of the testimony. right? Let's see, does the testimony check out? Good, if testimony checks out, step 2, the actual din Torah, the actual adjudication of the case. Then step three is the delivery of the judgment, the verdict. So Gamar Sadavar, when they finally came up with the verdict, so what happened? Hayimachnisin Osan, Hagos, the greatest of the judges went and brought in the litigants and said, Omer, Ish ploni ata zakai, ish ploni ata chayav. And then they would say, the Beis Din would say, you're innocent or you're guilty. Okay, that's a din Torah. They both say, this is great. So both say, this is great. Now the Mishnah says, but when the case is over, the judges, right? Can you imagine this? This happens all the time in organizational work, right? That what happens, there's a group decision, and then what happens, one of the members of the group goes over to somebody adversely impacted. Oh, you know what, I just want to let you know, right? I really sided with you. But what can I do? The majority is the majority. The Mishnah says, Dayanim are not allowed to do that. They have to operate as a cohesive group. And even if somebody was in the minority, was a dissenting opinion, once the Beis Din delivers an opinion, they cannot go over to the litigants and say, just want to let you know, Ruvain, I was really rooting for you, right? I really think you're correct, but what could I do? The other Dayanim, they just didn't agree. You can't do that. Alzen ne'emar holich rachel megalasot lo selich rachel ba'amecha. So we're going to see this. This is one of the prohibitions. Rechilos is lashon hara, or a form of lashon hara. So you see from here that halacha l'maisa again. So kind of divulging information that you should not be divulging. Ultimately, again, is a form of lashon hara. So halacha l'maisa again, once the judges go ahead and, which I will say by the way, is also a profound idea in group dynamics. That if group dynamics are going to work, you have to become part of the group, even if your opinion is not executed. Otherwise, again, it doesn't really work. Fascinating. Okay, so we'll analyze that more. Hechi dami. So we'll say, by the way, Hechi amrilu. So the first part of the Mishnah was that we go ahead and when the witnesses come, we intimidate them. How do we intimidate witness? Right? I say it's so great. I always thought witness intimidation was usher. So apparently it's encouraged, right? So how do you go ahead and intimidate the witnesses? Now, I'll say when we say intimidation, obviously, what are we trying to do over here? We're trying to show them that giving testimony is incredibly important, and take seriously what you're doing. So intimidate doesn't mean we're trying to get them to say one thing or the other. The only thing we want out of them is the truth. So how do we intimidate them, so to speak? This is what we say to them. So we'll say, so essentially, quote over here, the Gemara quotes over here, the pasuk from Mishlei. And it says that sometimes, the clouds and the wind could be there, but ultimately, again, the rain doesn't come. Why? Ish mishal b'misa sheker. The penalty of lying is that lying could often result in the withholding of rain. So essentially what we tell this person is, if you lie, don't understand, you're not just impacting yourself. Your lie and your corruption of justice is going to have an impact, could have an impact on everyone. This is very profound because a lot of times in the psychology of sin, right? Why do we commit averos? There are many different levels to why we commit averos. But one of the reasons why we commit averos is because we think, kind of like on a macro level, what I'm doing doesn't matter. It matters on a micro level. In other words, I'll accept the fact that what I do matters for me, but I convince myself that what I do does not really have an impact on anyone else. I live in a silo. And it's really not true. Yesterday's daf, whatever I do impacts you, and whatever you do impacts me. And I will say sometimes that is the greatest deterrent to sin, because when I recognize that at the end of the day, so my actions have an impact not just on me, but on everyone. So we tell the Dayanim, we tell the Eidim, if you lie, just understand that could result in the withholding of rain. In other words, that literally could have an impact. So the Gemara says, Amar Rava, that's not going to have an impact on the witnesses. Why? Sometimes the famine extends for 7 years. So the witness could always say, the good news is, my profession is not dependent on the rain. Right? So I'll be all right. even if it doesn't rain, it's not going to impact me. So essentially what Rav is saying is, you're presupposing that the witnesses care about anyone other than themselves. So if they care about other people, that might be a good argument. If they only care about themselves, even the withholding of the rain is not necessarily going to be a motivation to get them to tell the truth. Amar Rava, what should you say to them? Amrin Allahu, we say to them, Mapatz v'cherev v'chetz shenon, ish one baraso, 8 sheker. 8 shagam. So we'll say, so then again, quote another pasuk, and this pasuk talks about again the fact that there be swords and spears and terrible punishments that happen to someone who testifies falsely. Amar Ravashi, Yichali l'meimar shev shani hava musna ve'inish b'lo shani lo shachiv. So the witnesses could always respond, you know what? Even if there are 7 years of a terrible plague, a person never dies earlier than they're supposed to. Which means, again, these are theologically astute witnesses, right? And they can say back, you know what, I got it, I hear what you're saying, but at the end of the day, a person never leaves this world unless Kadosh Baruch Hu wants them to leave this world. Okay, Amar Ravashi, Amr li Nasan bar Mar Zutra, Amrina lahu Sahadi Shakri, Ar Gayu Zili. Listen to this. So Ravashi says, here's what you say to the witnesses. Guys, just understand, people who lie, false witnesses, even the people who hire them, don't respect them. Don't respect them. So Moshe, the idea the pasuk highlights over here that even talking about an episode where witnesses were hired, but the hired witnesses were called b'nei Belial. That even the people who witness will say, what does this mean? We tell the witnesses, just understand, if you're willing to sell your integrity, no one respects you. Because even the people who hired you, even the people who bought you, recognize that you could be bought. And I'll say, interestingly enough, the Gemara says, oh, that's it. That's going to be what sways the witnesses. It could be that punishment from HaKadosh Baruch Hu is not going to be enough to win the day. But the notion that if I lie for testimony, I am fundamentally debased, and no one will respect me. Even the people who hired me, I'm doing what they want, but the people who hire me, they also look down on me. Why do they look down on me? Because they know that I could be bought. So both say the notion that I have zero integrity and no one respects me, that's how we intimidate the witnesses. Incredible, incredible. So the Gemara goes right to him. Amar hu, amar li, ad sheyomru b'fanenu hodlo shu chayv l'masayim. So we'll say, so remember again, interestingly enough, so the Mishnah said, when is the testimony accepted, or when does it become credible? Only if witness number 1 says, we were present when Ruvain, the borrower, admitted his debt in the presence of Shimon, the lender, which indicates to us that just if Ruvain were to admit the fact that he owes money to someone, even to the witnesses, right, or to someone stam, not in the presence of the lender, that statement has no credibility to it. So let's analyze that. So that again, I will say in general, when a borrower admits that he owes money to a lender, the statement is only meaningful if he appoints people as witnesses to witness Todah, to witness the admission. So Tanya, so Amar Libiadecha, Amar Lohain. Supposed to listen to this. So Shimon goes over to Ruvain, says, Ruvain, you owe me money. Ruvain says, yep, I do. Lamacha Amar Lo Tineuli. The next day Shimon goes over to Ruvain and says, give it to me. Amar Mishatani B'cha. And Ruvain says, I was just kidding. What's the halacha? Pater. Reuven is pater. Why are both sides? Because an admission that only takes place between the borrower and the lender is not halachically valid. That supports this. Right, Shimon goes over to Reuven. Reuven, you owe me $1,000. Amar Lohain, and Reuven says, yeah, I do. L'machar Amar Lo Tineuli. The next day, Shimon says to Reuven, give me my money. Amar Lo Meshatani B'cha. And Reuven says, I was kidding around with you. I was just kidding around. So halacha l'mayis, again, what's the halacha? So the Gemara says pater. Ultimately, again, Reuven is going to be pater. Again, the admission that was made between Reuven and Shimon has no halachic standing. Not only that, listen to this. Afilu hechmin lo edim achore geder. But listen to this. So Shimon learns daf yomi. So Shimon does like this. Shimon goes over to Reuven, and Shimon has 2 witnesses hiding right behind the wall. And he says, Reuven, you owe me $1,000. And Reuven says, yes, I do. And Shimon says, are you willing to admit the loan in front of 2 witnesses? And Reuven responds, and Reuven says, no, I'm not admitting it. I admit that I owe you, but there's no way I'm admitting it in front of witnesses, because if I do that, you could drag me to Beis Din. So I'll say, now meanwhile, remember again, there are witnesses who hear this whole thing. Shimon knows about the witnesses because he brought them. Reuven has no knowledge of them. The next day then, Shimon comes to Reuven and says, Reuven, give me my money. Ultimately again, and Reuven says, I was kidding around. Nevertheless, Potter. Now both say, now what's the chiddush over here? The chiddush over here is that even though there were witnesses, right? There were witnesses, but because the witnesses were not known by or appointed by Reuven, therefore the admission halacha l'maisa has no teeth to it. It has no halachic validity. However, ve'in tonin l'mesis. But both say, if somebody incites his friend to do avodah zarah, Beis Din does not advocate on his behalf. Someone else says, what are you talking about? Mesis man de karshme. Who's talking about a mesis? So it's incredible. There's a piece missing, is what it means to say. Im lo tan, in ton and lo. So we'll say, in general, in general, when a person comes to Beis Din, Beis Din does not act as an advocate on behalf of someone. In other words, I will say sometimes a person will come with a court case and the Dayanim know, oh, you could make this claim, you can make that claim. Beis Din doesn't do that, right? Beis Din is not your advocate. Beis Din is a Beis Din. Get a good lawyer, right? But Beis Din is not your advocate. However, when it comes to capital cases, Beis Din will advocate on behalf of the defendant. So in other words, if there is a claim that the defendant could make to free himself from a death penalty and he doesn't make it, Beis Din will advocate on his behalf. However, the Gemara says, but this doesn't apply to avodah zarah. If somebody is on trial for is trying to incite idolatry, incite other people to idolatry, in that case, even though that is a capital case, Beis Din will not advocate on his behalf. Why is that? Because the Torah says, do not be compassionate and do not go ahead and cover for him. So how do we know that halacha l'maisa we do not advocate for someone who incites avodah zarah? Listen to this. Minachash hakadmoni. We learn it ultimately again from the snake. The snake in Bereshis. The snake could have advanced many different claims in order to save himself from punishment, and he didn't do so. And therefore, and the Rebbeinu Shalom, you see, did not advocate on behalf of the snake, even though he could have. Why? Because the snake was inciting rebellion against Hashem. He was inciting Chava to rebel against HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Says the Gemara, my what could the snake have said? Divrei harav, divrei talmud mishomin. Divrei harav shomin. Snake could have said, listen, Chashbarach, what are you getting angry at me? Chava should have known better. You're right. I, the snake, was telling her one thing. You, HaKadosh Baruch Hu, was telling her something different. When the Rebbe tells you one thing and the student tells you something else, who should you listen to? The Rebbe. So don't put it on me. Don't put it on me, says the snake, or the snake could have said, put it on Chava. So from here you see that as much as Beis Din will go ahead and advocate on someone in capital cases, when it comes to avodah zarah, if someone is accused of avodah zarah, Beis Din does not advocate on that person's behalf. Where do you learn that from? From the snake. Because the snake inciting Chava to sin was a form of avodah zarah, rebellion against God, and HaKadosh Baruch Hu did not advocate on behalf of the snake, even though there was advocacy to be done. Furthermore, the Gemara says, how do you know that I was in general? When you add on to mitzvos, you end up subtracting. Chava, when she responds to the snake, says, Hashem told us not to eat from the tree and not to touch it. Now, God never told them not to touch it. You could touch the tree. But the fact that Chava ended up adding on caused her to go ahead and detract. From here, so it's by the Mishkan, right? By the Aron it says Amasayim. If you take off the Aleph, so what could happen? Or again, reposition the alphabet, become Masayim, 200. By the curtains, Ashtei Esrei means 11. Go ahead and take off or remove the ayin, it becomes shtei esrei, 12. So we'll say, so what do you see from here? What do you see from here? You see from the halacha that if you, halacha l'maisa, that if you change, when HaKadosh Baruch Hu said, you end up with all kinds of problems. So the idea, so again, we see from the Nachash, but I will say from Chava, what we see is she added onto the prohibition, so because she added onto the prohibition, she ended up detracting from it. Don't tamper with the system. HaKadosh Baruch Hu tells us what to do and how to do it. The Torah outlines a system for us. Is there a place for rabbinic safeguards? Absolutely, absolutely. But one has to be careful how and when those are implemented, because sometimes when you begin to tamper with the system, even though you're adding on more, it may actually come to lead you to subtract from the system. I have to turn the page. Amar Abaye, Lo shanu ela damar mishatani b'cha. Furthermore, again, when is Ruvain not believed? When Ruvain says, I was just kidding, right? Because remember again, Shimon came over to Ruvain. He said, Ruvain, you owe me $1,000. Ruvain says, yeah, I did. Yeah, I do. Then the next day Shimon comes to collect, and Ruvain says, I was just, right? Ruvain says, I was just kidding. So the Gemara says he's pater. When is he pater? When he mamish says, I was just kidding. Aval Amar Amud Beis. Aval Amar Lo Hayu Dvar Me'olam Hochzak Kafran. Oh, so I'll say, so ultimately again, but if he said, no, this I never borrowed money from you, so I'll say, so now he's literally doing a 180. Yesterday he said, I owe you money. Right? Today he's saying, I don't owe you money, then he's a liar. If he said, yesterday I owe you money, and then today Shimon comes to collect, and Reuven says, I was just kidding with you, that's fine. That's fine. We could justify that. But if he says I don't owe you money, so Rav Papa read Rav Acha Bar Ada Hachi Amrina Mishay Rava Komili Dikdei Lo Dakiri Inshi. So Rav Papa says something very interesting. He says no. Even if Ruvain says today I don't know, right, I don't owe you anything, that's okay. He's not a liar. Why is he not a liar? Sometimes people forget stuff. And it's possible that even though Ruvain said yesterday that he owed Shimon money, it's possible that maybe he forgot, and that he's not really lying, but rather he actually forgot about what he said yesterday. Also, stop over here for today. To continue tomorrow, tremendous. Shkoyach. I also just want to point out, we did a blot of Gemara. It's just the wrong blot. I was right. We did the two sides of the page. So again, we're right on target. We all catch up in no time. Shkoyach, everyone. All right, Josai, Chevron on Zoom. I feel like you're a more forgiving audience than the live audience. Thank you for your understanding. We'll get there. We'll get there. Have a great day, everyone. Yeah.
It's crazy. This whole thing.
Yeah.
Is that similar to we know that laughing and crying come from the same